The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. And now, another great bunch of entries. I just did not have a dud. I have looked over all of the 146 entries as they came in and sort of did pre-evaluation, kind of making sure that all the, that everything all worked together, and, that I would be able to evaluate it on screen and so on. And yeah, just really looking at everybody's entries, they're all really worth talking about, and I feel worth viewing for you, the viewer out there, the subscribers, and the longtime followers of this channel. So I think I came up with a pretty good piece this time. Lily Boulanger's D'un Jardin Clair, that just really inspired a lot of imaginations, and certainly no less in this case. Brian, I thought that you did a great job here. I really like the way that you allowed individual, like you do build up textures and so on, but you do allow individual colors to stand out. And you do a little bit of dynamic mixing here and there, but it's, I think that you're doing it to sort of build a tapestry, right? There's a kind of a textural effect intended. Now, sometimes this gets to be a little much. Do you know what I mean? When you have just so many different dynamics marked on different parts, rather than just having like basic foreground and background, plus maybe a little bit of a boost to the softer instruments. And there are some things that just really simply don't work that well in terms of anybody being able to hear it that much, like the celesta right in here. But all the same, it's just. I see where you are heading with this, and some of this could have easily been done, like this could be more of an example of a mixed score, right? Where the, where say like if it were a film score or something like that. So I won't go on too much about things being out of balance, but just, to be aware that, that it's problematic to mark, this mezzo forte crescendo to forte, forte crescendo to what, and so on. And it just really ends up with parts that are overbalanced, unbalanced, and so on. It might sound good in terms of your sound sets, maybe the mock-up, but it isn't really necessarily something that is going to work on stage. Okay, and that is really my big concern. Now, as far as these fun little note heads are concerned, a triangle-shaped note head for triangle, in a concert part, just basically score a regular old note head right on the line, okay? It's just easier for everybody. And as far as symbols go, like these symbols could have been just the same exact thing, a single line part. Now, perhaps you were using this like in order to activate that particular note, that particular note performer sound on like the percussion staff. So fine, but all the same, just like standard notation, just like a single line with a regular note head is fine for me. okay, and should be fine for any orchestral percussionist. Okay, and harp, if you have these indicated, if you just add like a glissando line, you'll get glissandos that are not playing in the key signature, right? So here's where if this is Sibelius, and if it's not, then perhaps the application that you've got will supply the right notes. But just to mention that at least the first time you do this, you need a harp pedal setting, right? So the harpist knows that they're going to obey the key signature, just to make sure, because they have such little time to do readings and new scores and so on and so forth. Harpists in particular may be spending a lot of time like getting ready for opera and ballet stuff, which is just if there's so many notes in a Tchaikovsky score, for the harpist to learn, and some very intense writing certainly in many other theatrical works. So it's better to just really keep your harp parts as simple as possible, okay, and just as readable and so on. Now, right in here, this is where I kind of doubt that this would be all that audible, because you're just so strong in your other parts. Like you've got mezzo forte in wind and string parts, and you've got and horns, right? So especially these horns, especially with a big swell in the middle, are going to blot out anything that's going on here in the harp, right? So, and what's more, we have more examples of dynamic mixing here. Mezzo forte, mezzo piano, right? Wouldn't it be better just to have all the brass be soft, and then just have, if you wanted a little swell in there, like if the brass came down to piano, including the horns, then you just have a better balance here of elements, and the winds and strings coming down to just a simple mezzo piano, right? Or even more, you could go mezzo forte to pianissimo, and forte to piano, right? Just keep it really, really simple. Okay, all right, so let's just really look at the, without talking too much about balance, let's just really look at the orchestration itself. So I really love the way that you've got all this motion in here. All right, and then right here, I would say if you're going to have this much of an integrated texture, you really should mark like solo over this. And we've got another problem in the score too, and that is that I don't know how many instruments are being used, right? How many horns? 2, 3, 4, right? Trumpet, right? Oboe, I see clarinet. And then when you do use one or two voices, it's kind of arbitrary, right? Like I don't know which player is being used at what time, right? Is this the first oboe player, the second oboe player? Are you going to have like the second play right here, just like some basic background notes, and then the first come in here for the solo? Right, so there's just a little bit more organization that needs to be done in terms of like how the parts are allocated to different musicians, right? And here's another kind of bugaboo, right? You've got a big slur over a single voice, right? Now, if this is A2, right? If you intend to have two oboes, which I hope you don't, I'd really like the idea of the solo oboe here. So if this is A2 though, then everything's good for you to jump to two voices here. But if it is you're actually intending for like the first player to be playing this upper part, and then the second player to come in, the second player needs their own slur, right? And their own voice, because they are coming in, right? So it would be just better here. I would actually think to have like second voice writing, right? Just so it's really, really clear what's going on here with the slurs. Okay, but yeah, and then right in here, I'm really not sure what's going on. If you put a little rest right in here, like a second voice rest, then we would know that this was like two voices and then going to a single voice and then two voices again, right? Anyways, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but just watch out how you allocate the parts. So like right now, the score is not ready to go to the most important stand of all. That's the conductor's stand, right? So you would need to like fix a lot of things, maybe consult with a copyist to see like if you're really being clear, or just study, study that particular element, like how many voices are on a part, how do you mark them, when do you mark them, right? So that really needs to be done. All right, so back to the orchestration, solo clarinet, okay, and here you're really trying to suppress the volume of the piccolo. It's pretty wise right in there, okay? And yeah, da 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 da. Yeah. So yeah, that's all fine. And then da da ba da ba da ba da bum. Yeah. So this is all cool. Like right in here, you're sort of trading off to the flute, and then the flute goes on, and yeah, I mean it's a little strange, like the way that you're kind of playing. You're sort of suspending these notes. I think that's an adaptation of the piano part, and just like realistically how the sounds would sustain going forward through the piano part, and that's kind of clever. But and I mean it certainly works in this register for these instruments to play unison, so that's all good. Now just keep in mind that when you go up to here, this high F sharp is going to be a fairly strong note, right? It's going to be a very bright note, and you can tell the player that you want them to go back to being a little softer here, but it's that just will really dominate the sound picture to have this piccolo on top right here. Just really not shrieking, but just really adds a kind of a edge to the tone. It's almost like taking something that has a nice crest to it and making it razor sharp on top, right? That's kind of the effect that you end up with here. Everything else fairly nicely scored. I love the sense of motion here in the strings. That's all very tasteful, very nice. Okay. Just a little comment about upsweeps. Okay, you've got quite a bit of glissando happening here in the harp, and you've got like a bunch of like flittering around and fluttering and swooping down and swooping up. You kind of have to ask yourself, how much of that do you really want, right? How much is tasteful? How much of it is useful before it in itself starts to distract from the meaning of the music, right? Like do you get to the point where people are saying, "Oh, here comes another glissando"? I think the Korngold violin concerto. All right, so Korngold violin concerto was basically Korngold taking a lot of his cinematic scores and turning them into a violin concerto. Okay, well, all good. That's fine. But God, there were so many. There were just so many harp glissandos in that piece that I couldn't take it. I was actually reviewing it, right? So it just really kind of made it clear to me you have to be careful about how much you gesture towards something. Like when you swoop up like this or here, it's not just harp glissandos. It's also just like little runs that go up or down, like that lead to a downbeat. It's like you're pointing at something with a spotlight. You're saying, "Look over there," right? So how many times can you really do that and stay in the character of the music? All right. So just I'm not saying that what you're doing is right or wrong, but I'm just seeing a lot of it. So I want you to think about it next time you score something like this. Okay. Okay. So this is nice right in here. We have octaves in violins and violas. Now, just to point something out here, and that is, if you really want this to be heartfelt, just really, to just really have that wonderful, emotional character of like string sections solely kind of writing, this line would be better off as a cello line, right? So you could easily, give the part right in here to the violas, right? Just like from here, like this is fine for violas, right? This is fine for cello. So this part in here, and then just swap these parts right here entirely. So just have all of your cellos playing this, and have your violas splitting this up, right? And then the cellos can play over the viola parts, like just play on top of them over over those similar pitches in sync with the first violins, and then you just get a wonderful, just a powerfully unified octave sound in the strings. Whereas like violas have this will be unified with the way that you scored it, but it won't necessarily have the same kind of push, right? So, viola cannot, like it's the body size of the viola itself cannot actually contribute to the overall resonance that can shove from below, right? As opposed to just like, so just like the smaller body size and the slightly kind of tending to blend with things character of the violas makes it, if the violas have to compete with the cellos over the same range of notes, the violas are going to be the ones that are harder to hear, right? So like, there's a lot of like dynamic touching up that you should be doing here, right? So anyway, that's all I would just point to right there. And appreciate that you put in da 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 da. Right, we have the actual melody right here, but we're not hearing it any kind of doubling in the winds, right? Why couldn't one of your oboists go, D sharp, C sharp, right? We're not really hearing that. Like we're just hearing the harmony note on top of F sharp, not the melody that goes in the middle. All right, and then we have a little swoop up. Yep, bump, bump, bum. This is kind of cool. I love the little idea of like pizzicato in most of the strings. This is a little fiddly. Pizzicato, double stop, or divisi, and then like a little burst of note right in here. I almost feel like it would just be easier for the first violins to play all of these notes right in here. And then just leave the second violins to play pizzicato, or just divide it between two different voices of first violin, okay, or two different desks. Okay, so yeah, and kind of cool, look, once again, if you just balance these, like instead, have more uniform dynamics rather than just, one part being really soft and the other part being kind of louder and everything. Okay, so let me just have you think about something, all right? You've got your trumpet player sitting next to your horn player, right? And the trumpet player is listening to the horn players kind of play a bit out there, And they look at their parts and they see piano and think, well, that's kind of a loud mezzo forte, but that's kind of a loud piano. Like they assume that the horns have piano in their parts. It's kind of a loud piano, but look, if the conductor is not glaring at them, then I guess we better play a little louder, shouldn't we? Right? And then the same thing here, like the trombones will be playing soft, and they'll hear the trumpets playing mezzo forte, and they'll think, it's kind of a loud piano. Well, maybe we should play a little louder, right? So it makes more sense, like, to have unified dynamics especially in the brass section, okay? Not to mention all the other players in the orchestra. But it just, it's easier for them to work out their own balances and stuff. Like once you start getting into really loud dynamics, then you have to think about like the balance between horns and the heavy brass. But, aside from that particular consideration, like the brass really know how to balance themselves. And I'm really not seeing anything in here that kind of justifies these two bars in this staff and these two bars in this staff being soft opposed to everybody else's dynamics, right? Okay, but like the overall effect is fine. Bump, 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 bum. It's really cool. And then you should just sort of drop an octave right in here. That's really neat. And I think you were more concerned about the flurries in here than perhaps the overall scoring effect. But, that wasn't intended to be a slight at all. But yeah, but it still does work. I think that you still need to have staccato on the horns, though, right? Because like this is overall staccato plus pizzicato, and then you kind of have the same thing again, but the horns are just playing normal notes, and they do need to play staccato. Okay, now we have our final big tutti. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, now here I would say what I've said to other orchestrators, and that is if you have big harmonized scoring in winds and brass, then the safest thing for the strings to do is to play octaves, right? So in this case, like walking down from F sharp, just like you have the trumpet right in here. It's just safer for the strings to stick to octaves because the ear of the listener will fill in like the sound of strings playing harmony playing all the harmony notes in between those octaves, like filling in the chord. Whereas, like, if you stretch the strings across the chord this way, then you'll hear a little bit of first violin on top, but the other strings will really kind of be buried in the texture, right? So it's better to unify the strings on kind of strong octaves, strong melody notes, with the harmony given to the winds and the strings. That is like the oldest trick in the book, right? It's, goes all the way back to, I'm trying to think, like, I think Berlioz does it, and Weber. I'd have to look up the exact beginning of that particular convention, but it is a great way to fool the ear into thinking that the strings are just as spaced across all of the harmony notes as the winds and brass, but they actually aren't. They're just playing octaves. Okay, and then, yeah, you've got your little resolution here. Yeah, and your little bird singing and everything else. So, I mean, it's a cool score. I really enjoyed looking at it, and it's a great place to start for this group of evaluations. Okay, so, yeah, just makes me all energized. And so while I've got that energy, let's just jump to the next score now. Thank you so much, Brian. That's a great little score, Usman. There are a few things to work out about this, but I really like the very light-hearted, kind of airy feeling to it that isn't necessarily impressionist. It is more, I feel, kind of middle romantic, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Mendelssohn, actually, or it's got a it's got a nice open feeling to it, and it just doesn't, nothing really feels forced or anything like that. It's very cool. So it's interesting what you're doing here with the harmony in sort of supplying the middle note of this chord here with with the horn, right? So this is a transposing score, right? So this F sharp is a B. So I mean, that's kind of cool. So, you move it around a little bit, and then that middle note kind of rises, and so on and so forth. And the context of the harmony changes as the part goes forward. Okay, so, but I still think that's pretty cool. I would just say, just really make sure, I would actually mark the horn down a little bit to like pianissimo, just to really get a good blend in there. Because, like, piano on horn is still louder than piano on bassoon, right? So you just really do need to control that a little bit. The other thing too is that I don't really know if this sort of background pad needs to swell like this, crescendo diminuendo. I think this is good. Like, you're crescendoing with you're bringing this out, and I guess at that point you want the stronger voices to, or the idea of stronger harmony to carry on in the accompaniment. So if that's the case, then fair enough. But I feel that really the only thing that needs to crescendo here is the melody, right? Except for the effect of just like, growing, like the growing tension of tremolo. Now, I don't really think that you need to have this divisi here. I think this can be all the first violins and then octaves. I don't think you need to maintain some kind of, proportion here, because the violas, it's not going to really matter. Seriously, you don't need to be that exacting about it. Cool little pizzicato right in here. I like the little bit of celesta right in here. Now, going farther though, these 4 bars of celesta are pretty much wasted until you get to this note here. Okay, because especially with strong woodwind writing right in here, a strong higher horn note, that is that is something that the celesta just cannot compete against. This little note right here in celesta is not going to come through, no matter what your mock-up may say. Okay, and especially once you get to adding trumpet in there, just the overtones of these brass instruments just basically kill whatever's going on in celesta. So I mean, you might hear a little tink in the background, but you don't really hear the beautiful ringing sound, right? And especially it's just kind of wasted here, anyways, right? And because of all of the strength of the woodwind writing. Now, so speaking of which, your melody continues onward, and here you kind of split the parts up. The higher notes going to the flute, and that is all perfectly fine the way that this is scored. Da da ba 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 ba. And da 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 da. Yes, it's just really nicely done, I thought. And then just little like the way that you bring in the clarinet here is also really great. So nice scoring right in here. Just really kind of no problems at all. Except that I would just bring the volume of the horn down, right? So start pianissimo, go up to mezzo forte here, and then end pianissimo, and also come in here, I would say mezzo piano to pianissimo, right? And then you get a really good blend with everything else that's going on. The way that this is now, these notes will stand out in horn and trumpet. Okay, so now going on to the next part, da 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 dum ba da da dum. Okay, so this is very cool. This little arpeggiando right in here, little touch of cymbal. It's all very cool. Yeah, and just little bits of figuration behind the melody in clarinet, just very nicely done. It's, subtly done. I would say to try to keep it more background rather than pushing forward into. It's kind of interesting though, da 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 da, as opposed to da 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 da. Right, so like you're pushing you're changing the place of your crescendo to later on, right, going into the next bar. And here we have some similar strategies on the next page. Da 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 dum. It's right here. It's like you split this, so that's pretty good. And I really like the fact that you have spread out the harmony note and the actual melody in the middle there across 2 octaves, right? And we've got the ba da dum in the clarinet. So yeah, just really nice. Taking care of the different functions of the line, adding decoration, and yeah, so this is a little strange here. So I think you intended to have 4 horns, and you kind of added 2 on this page, so that's fine. It's kind of like a sketch, work in progress, etc. Now here you're going to the second flute doing the trill, right? So it's just better to keep the first trill on the same, the first flute on the same trill, okay? Just make sure that like they're doing the same job, right? So that way you just get the most consistent sound across. It's kind of nice to split up the duties and stuff like that, but here I think that's just overdoing it. Just have your first flute player do all these trills, right? Do both these trills. And this is cool. Little touch of bassoon right in there. Yeah, okay, so now here we get to bum 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 bum, and I think here it would have been good for you to bring in some kind of articulation style, whether it be like tenuto staccato or mezzo staccato, like slurred staccato. I think that would have worked really, really great. Okay, and then yeah, just this cool little bassoon line going downhill. That's very nice. It kind of distracts from the bum bum, kind of the 5/1 in the double basses. But anyhow, one thing I think that may get a little overused is the timpani. Right? I think that like it's probably better to have timpani answered by pizzicato bass, or maybe even bassoon staccato, and then maybe just like decide which one of these you really want, right? Because you already have tremolo diminuendo in the strings right here, right? The rolling of the timpani tends to kind of subtract a little bit from the significance here, right? Maybe or maybe even just have this down, like if you really have to have this at the end, really like maybe start at mezzo piano, right, and then just going down to pianissimo, just behind everybody rather than in front, right? Because after a while, people just really start to notice the timpani, right? It just really starts to stand out in front of the music. Okay, and then this is nice. Answering higher than rather than lower, right? So there are a lot of places where you were answering where participants in this challenge would have a higher and then lower, sort of higher and then lower in pitch kind of answer. Here we're going lower and then higher. I think that's very, very cool. Once again, some kind of staccato articulation might have been really nice here to kind of bring out what Lili is doing in the piano part. Okay. And then you have just this little chirp right in here. Yeah, it's kind of cool. And then these harmonic notes really do have a chance of being heard, right? But you have to start here. You really do have to start pianissimo on your roll, or else they just get drowned out. All right, then all brass, and this is interesting. There are no slurs at all here, right? And I just feel that it's like the strongest choice of all to make. Bum 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 bum, right? And then right in here, dovetailing. You're going forte strings. So if you really want this to overlap, like if you want the sound of what's going on here to just go straight into the strings, as if like they were just merging together, then you have to score this differently. Okay, so I would say like anything like forte on brass is going to equal fortissimo on strings, right? If you want perfect balance. However, there's no need to do that. What you just need to do is move your diminuendo to here, right? So da da da, and I would put a little diminuendo here to mezzo forte, then have the strings playing forte like they are here, and then a further hairpin down to pianissimo, right? Dun dun, right? And this is all cool in here, just adding the winds in the background. To kind of bolster what's going on here, or to double it. So yeah, so I mean, a really cool score, Usman. I mean, it's great to, it's great to have a contribution from you. And for people who do not know this, Usman actually played the piano part last time around. I've been approaching different YouTube piano players and asking them if they could contribute like a piano version of the entries for the past couple of years. Like this year we had Sofia Urivieva Martin, and last year Usman was the pianist, and he did a great job. And what I really liked about his approach to the Mussorgsky was that it wasn't that it was like probably more realistic to the period. It was a little bit drier, not so sort of lush and impressionistic as other versions. He just kept it he really kept things clean and clear, and I think that really helped people to hear all of the functions in the music rather than everything just kind of washing together. So just to kind of see once again, like I can really hear all the different functions and everything is just very clear and exact. And I think that that's a really good feature just in general of your musicianship, is just to be able to see all the things that you need to see, and to have really nice contrasts between things. And that's also clear in your piano playing. You have beautiful contrasts and color shading and stuff just in your piano playing. So yeah, so just really great to keep you involved with all of this, and yeah, it's just terrific to to hear from you and to include you and to have you as a subscriber to the website, and just for you to be like a really active member of the community. It really means a lot. So thanks so much. I really haven't been talking about this that much, but anybody's insights on anybody else on anybody else's score, please. Please give people feedback, and like, if there's something that you feel that they need to hear from your perspective, share it. If you just like the way that they did the piece, let them know. It's really, really important. So anyways, with that, I will jump ahead to the third out of 6 of the entries for the J evaluations. This is a great score. Thank you so much, Heiner. It's a really excellent work. Now, I do have a lot of things to say about different things that you need to try or think about in your scoring. However, it's obvious that your enthusiasm could barely be contained by the parameters of the challenge, and you really had some great ideas going forward. Okay, so I would suggest, if you really feel the need to score 3 minutes of music, 2 minutes of music, rather than just like 20 seconds or whatever, then please consider possibly next year, the next challenge, maybe supporting on Patreon, and maybe having me give you like a lesson that's like close to an hour long, right? Like I am with the very last of the dotted brev / longa level participants who are going to be evaluated starting this week. Because I just think it would be worth it for you, because you just really have got, you got so much enthusiasm, so many great ideas, and, obviously you're developing as an orchestrator and doing some great things, and this, just imagine if you had scored the whole thing and then submitted it to a reading by an orchestra, right? I think that it would be great to... actually, I was just thinking about it just now, and I thought it would, wouldn't it be funny if orchestras were starting to get wise to our orchestration challenges, and either offer challenges that include, that specifically say, hey, orchestration challenge entries are welcome, or vice versa. They might say, look, don't. Here's a list of things you shouldn't submit that are just all challenges that we've had here, because they're getting so many scores of Lily Boulanger or Bartok or any of the other composers, Mussorgsky, Ravel. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. Now, the first thing that you have to think about here is that it is rare to find a celesta that goes below C below middle C, right? So that actually C below middle C, written C below middle C, is actually middle C, right? So you're asking the celesta to play notes below sounding middle C. So did I say that right? Written C in the staff is below sounding middle C. So if maybe I said it wrong. Anyways, but yeah, the notes that are below C here are out of range unless you have a celesta that has extra notes on it. Some celestas do, but most of them don't. So I would say don't score stuff like this. I would, and in fact, if you want this to have a better effect, it should be an octave higher anyway, because the lower you get below written middle C on a celesta, the more funky the sound is, and you can even just hear that in the mock-up, like the instead of having like a beautiful kind of open sound like a vibraphone would in that same range, it has kind of a thunk, kind of a thunk thunk kind of a sound, and it just doesn't have the beautiful natural ring to it, right? That's just because the operation of the mechanism and having to strike metal bars and stuff like that just doesn't work below a certain pitch in the same way. You would have to sort of change, if you wanted absolute consistency and to have beautiful ringing notes lower, then you would just really have to change the operation and the size of the instrument entirely, right? And that's kind of why things are kind of limited in, below written middle C on celesta. But if you were just to boost all of this up an octave, it would not only be playable, but it would be a great companion to what's going on in the harp. Now, here with this harp scoring, you really should have scored this, with this in the left hand and then this in the right hand, right? So just like trading off between hands, because that's how it will be played. So the the harpist is going to want to play these 2 notes in a row, then these, then coming back, and then I would say left, right, left, and then continuing on left, right, left, right? So that is how, but you see here you've got this, you're complicating things by having this note here. But the problem with this note, like, it's not playable because, like, maybe you intend this to be the sounding note. If you intended it to be the sounding note, it would have to be played on this string, but this string is already being used. If you intended this to be the note that is plucked, the actual string that is plucked, actually, harmonics don't really work above the staff. I mean, I would say the highest note that you would want to score harmonics for would be like A, right? Or maybe A sharp. But like, to using the A string. But like when you get smaller than that, it just doesn't, the note doesn't make any sense. It doesn't speak the way that you think it will, right? So if you just want this pitch, right, then that's easily done. I would just work it into the right hand as something that it was just normally playing. But to give all of these pitches to the left hand is not a thing. Okay, especially not at this speed, 144, right? It's better to split it up between the hands. And maybe just to get rid of this note, or just have it be like something that the left hand can play hand over hand. Actually, that's what I would do, hand over hand here. So left, right, with the left hand, just plucking this note, not playing it as a harmonic, and then back down again. Okay, so there's no problems in the otherwise, and this is all works great, just so long as as you're keeping track of the of the pedal changes, so long as it doesn't look like there's any issues with pedal changes. So that is all going to work fine. Okay, so just looking at the scoring, cor anglais, da 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 bum bum. It's nice that you've got this continuing on. I just really like the way that the winds work together going on right in here. That's very, very cool. The only thing I'm not too sure about is this trill right in here with the second flute. Just not too clear about how that is going to come through, right? You have this marked like pianissimo to mezzo piano and back. I would mark it piano to mezzo forte and back. Just mark everything up a dynamic notch there, okay? And I would not actually start a solo on like mezzo piano to mezzo forte crescendo is like blah to blah. You know what I mean? It's like the mezzo piano and mezzo forte are moderated dynamics whose main use is like being on the way to something or to blend in, like they're just like a blending dynamic, right? I mean, I think that's the best use of mezzo dynamics, but using them in their own as a kind of a default dynamic is a mistake, I feel. I think that you should just start at piano crescendo and you should just trust that the musician is going to play it loud enough, right? So just mezzo piano, or just start piano crescendo to mezzo forte is fine, but just mezzo piano to mezzo forte is like almost nothing. It's like, it really is, it's like gray. They're like shades of gray. They don't really have the same color as just committing. Like just commit to being loud or soft, right? Or piano, right? But it's like there's so many mezzo dynamics here at the beginning, right? So I just think that your score would become much brighter and more, and just really, the colors of the orchestration would just leap out if you could just get away from all of these mezzo dynamics. Okay, so everybody has heard my lectures on this. I'm just gonna go on now. Okay, so first oboe and clarinet in octaves, doubled by first violin in octaves. And I really love this. legato, right? So just call it legato, and then you don't need all the long slurs, right? So I mean, imagine imagine a violinist playing this all with one bow, right? How about if they just went up, down, up, down, up? Do you know what I mean? So like this is just a lot of notes to be playing under one bow and just a lot of changes to be going through dynamically, right? Because like you really should be backing off here, right? Not just letting it play forte to the end of the bar. Okay, so once again going on, we've got all these mezzo dynamics, right? And everything is really mixed. It's all like a mixing board, right? Just try to have a foreground and a background color, right? What if everything was mezzo forte, except for the brass, which were piano, right? Just really keep it simple. This is kind of fun right in here. This should just be done as a glissando, right? Just have a line from a low F sharp half note going up to this right here, okay? And it'll be totally fine. All right, so this is great. Da 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 da. Right, and like that high F sharp is not being emphasized at all. Right? Okay. Now, going on, dun 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 dun. Okay, so here we've got a big problem. Okay, look at the logic of what you're asking to do here with your slurs. All right, there are two problems. The first is like you've got two voices that are being slurred into the next bar, right? Okay, and then you have the second voice continuing on with its own slur. So basically the second voice has got two slurs. That doesn't make any sense, right? So that's the first problem. Okay, the second problem is that when you have mezzo staccato like this, you really should just have the slur over the staccato, right? And then start again with a fresh articulation on the next beat, right? Rather than just slurring it all together, right? Because it doesn't make any sense to have a slur passing from here to there, because the mezzo staccato is a very specific kind of articulation under one slur. And so if you go onto a normally articulated note, how do you slur from that, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So the slur should just be this long anyway, right? Okay, so just think of both things. Okay, and that, I mean, for celesta, it doesn't really matter because that is a very, pianistic kind of instrument. So it's really different. But this is the dangers of transporting or importing the piano to style slurring onto a brass part or onto like an orchestra part. Now this is interesting. So you've got mezzo staccato and you've got tenuto, which is long bows, like yo, yo, yo. So whenever you think of this, just think of the word zoom. Zoom, 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 right? Just because it's like the very long bow, the feeling of the long bow there. All right, so does that go together with right? So you just should ask yourself that, right? Okay, and then this is really lovely, the contrast, right? With a little bit of harp. Okay, so I've mentioned this. It's not so much of a concern, but you're doing a lot of upsweeps. Like this is really good. I just really love this twice. I thought that was an example of this working really well, like as a gesture. But how many times can you gesture upwards like that, right? So just be aware of going yum, especially with the crescendo, right? It's like saying, "Hey, look over here." Right? It's very similar to like how they have modern documentaries where like the camera will pan quickly and then they'll actually add the sound of like a zoom kind of a sound as the camera moves around, right? So it's almost like we're telling the listener what to pay attention to, right? Rather than just making it obvious by just the color and the ingenuity and the adaptation of the original material, right? So I'm just saying, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying, watch out, everybody. Okay? Okay. Okay, so cool timpani scoring. Okay. Bum, 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 bum. And this is lovely. Just going straight to horns. bassoons and lower strings. I really like that, and this is going to come through really beautifully, the harp right in here. Right? Now here, just kind of same comments as I've made before. If you're going to have like a chorale type effect in brass and winds or winds, right? One or the other or both, then it's probably not going to be as effective to have the strings also playing such intense harmony. It might be better just to have the strings playing in octaves because the ear fills in the harmony and with the string-like sound, right? It's just an effect. It's a trick. So I'd recommend that here instead of fully harmonizing the strings, right? Just let the brass be fully harmonized and have the strings play simple octaves, and then you have the most intense sound. You have the loudest, the most amount of force of each separate string instrument on just one single note, one single line walking down, or octaves walking down. And you just they're able to compete with the brass. The way that this is, with the notes spread across the strings, they don't have the same kind of power as the brass. But I do commend you for having balanced things out, mezzo forte as opposed to forte. Now here I would go diminuendo to piano, right? Just really have it like fade out under the strings so that you're able to bridge over to these other instruments very softly. Okay, so more things I could say. I better stop now, but really great score, Heiner. I really appreciate you subscribing, and any comments any feedback that you have for your other fellow participants for this video is hugely appreciated. In fact, that's what really makes this community strong. So I'm relying on you. I'm relying on all 6 of you guys to comment on each other's scores. Please do, okay? That, if you're thankful for this, that's the way to thank me, all right? So thanks for the great score, and now on to our next score of this group of 6. Excellent score, Jim. Just, really enjoyable to look this over. Of course, there are going to be a few suggestions that I'll make, but in general, it's just really strong and, almost ready to go to the stands. Maybe just a few little things need to be put back in there that might have been forgotten. Okay, so starting off, I would just caution against using the flute as a doubling instrument so low in its range with an instrument that like with first violins, like the first violin sound or the first violin timbre is so dominant that I think that low flute doesn't really add to it unless it plays over it, if you know what I mean. So like if the first flute were marked mezzo forte here, I think that it could sit in front of the violin sound. But the way that it is now, I feel like the first violins would just basically absorb it without it adding a whole lot to their tone quality until around right here. Like once you get to around D sharp, maybe C sharp, you start to hear it become more of a contributing timbre, right? So I mean, this could have just been first violin, right? Or maybe like clarinet. Like I think that maybe clarinet would be a better, like, it would just give that edge to the strings. In this kind of scoring, you have to add, like, what does the instrument give? What does it give up from itself to the string tone, right? And in the case of flute, I just feel that it kind of just gets stomped without really adding a whole lot. Like clarinet, though, will add like a kind of a cool cutting sound to it, to the sound of the strings. Oboes would make it more warm, same as bassoon and so on. Saxophone would make it really fat, right? So just like, it's like, what's the contributing factor? Here I don't feel it's as strong as it could be, right? But the other elements are really nice. I really love the high bass clarinet scoring. Just really lovely, like a lovely way to bring out those particular notes, right? Okay, so things climb up. We eventually add more and more texture to it. You're very careful to keep the horns in the background, and I think here you could also have kept this under. Could have kept this in check as well, like just gone up to a mezzo forte with your crescendo. Now, to make this really work in Sibelius, you could, like, if you really want the mock-up to work, you could just go Shift Command H or Shift Control H if you're on a PC, right? And then the mock-up will work, right? If you prefer using crescendo as a text mark, right? But I kind of feel that it's really nice to add a hairpin because it really, especially if you're backing off with a hairpin, it's kind of nice to sort of for the players to really proportion it visually, right? Rather than just having crescendo. Yeah, okay, well that could mean anything. How much crescendo do I add where, right? So it's assumed that they'll be pretty much going straight up from pianissimo crescendo to forte or mezzo forte if you accept my recommendation. But yeah, I mean, forte, horns plus trumpet on top will basically just swamp the harp. The only way that the harp has got any chance of being heard here is for the brass to be softer. And actually, if you really want this to stand out, you'll boost it an octave, right? So just like so that it really plays over the top of things rather than inside where it has to compete with the other winds and the strings and so on. Okay. But I mean, everything else is kind of nicely scored right in there. People have been scoring this opening in terms, harmonically, really pretty well. I don't, it's rare that I'm seeing something that doesn't quite work. Okay, so going on to the next part, the development. Da 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 dum ba da 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 dum. It's nice. It's nicely done. So you would think, with this much weight on the melody, like first flute and first oboe, playing that in the mock-up it would sound pretty good. But like you really have beefed up this line, da da dum, da da dum. All right, we're doubling it here, and we've got the first clarinet sitting on it too, right? So that is just really, the mock-up is telling you something for real there, and that is that the accompanying part is scored more strongly than the melody there, right? And once again, we're using flute in a fairly weak register till we get up to the F sharp. So like, I mean, you'd have to decide if you want a kind of wind quintet, wind sextet kind of sound here with a little bit of strings in the background in order for it really to be worth your while to score oboe plus flute there and have an interesting blended sound, as opposed to what you will probably get is like this line really standing out and the flute player just adding a little bit of color to the oboe line, which will stick out if the player really if the conductor really kind of gives a come here sign to the oboist. But I do like this right in here. That's nicely scored. I would say the melody needs a little bit more help here from somebody, whether it's doubling with first violin or something else. And you can probably back off on adding so much weight here to this line. Okay. And then just little touches of timpani. They're kind of fun. Okay, so now we're getting to bump, 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 bum. Okay, so this is like, so people who have heard me kind of crabbing about how to slur mezzo staccato, this is what I'm talking about. This is kind of what I want, right? Like mezzo staccato is one effect, and then there should be an articulation at the beginning of the next bar like this. And yeah, for this little resolving, this little resolution right in here, having its own slur and its own accent and everything else, that will work pretty well. However, like you really are scoring flutes very low throughout this entire piece, right? And right in here, the clarinets will really absorb what's going on with the flutes, right? So, but I mean, you do have the advantage of the fact that this is like all winds, right? So that is going to help. But it's still, like anywhere where you're tripling the flute, the first flute. So here you've got it tripled, like with oboe and first clarinet. So really, the flute can't compete, or contribute very strongly to that. And then getting even lower, the clarinets will really, and oboe will really absorb anything that the flute player has got to contribute right in there, right? So, yeah, so it's just a little problematic. I think that like you could ease off on some of this flute writing, and just get like results that are just more clear, more powerful, and just like and pretty much sound the same as what you wanted in the first place. All right, and then little answer here by the strings. Okay, and then we get to bum 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 bum, and this is nice. You put some weight on the top and the bottom here, like sort of 2 octaves apart. Okay, then you're filling in with brass. Okay, and then here, this is kind of interesting. This is something that I was talking about before, having just very strong octaves in the strings. And like you could have done that here too. Like you're choosing to sort of add a little bit of harmony around, like rather. I mean, it's kind of harmonized, but it isn't filling in every single harmonic note. So those are pretty strong places to put that in. So I don't fault this at all. This is fine. If the winds were fully harmonized throughout, I would say just do octaves on the strings. But this will work, but still, I just feel like if the brass are mezzo forte, that's what you're going to hear. You're basically going to hear them, and you're not going to really hear the winds and the strings very much, right? So forte, forte, mezzo forte. Then you've got yourself a balance. Diminuendo to pianissimo, and then piano in the other parts, right? And then you have just that score will work great. So yeah, I mean, there were a few other bars that you added there to the end. It seemed like you had a bit of a head of steam there, maybe just like, felt like it was worth it to orchestrate more. So, yeah, if you feel like in our next challenge, contributing like a longer entry, maybe, as a Patreon participant or supporter, it would be great to include you there, and to kind of read more of your ideas and your, because you do have like really, I'm sort of picking this apart and, and pointing out little things you could do to improve it. But the overall effect here is very quality orchestration. There's, it just needs to be tweaked a little bit to bring it into line, which is kind of my job. I feel like I'm more coaching you here than instructing you. Great to have another score from you, Sean. Okay, so looking at this score, just a few tips, everybody. You can leave out the piano bars, the piano staff, okay, when you submit your entry, because I don't think that it'll be needed much for reference by the people who are viewing this. Just to point out a few things here. As long as we've got it here, let's take a look at the way that you are using the original slurring of the piano part, right? So pretty much you're just allowing like the instruments that you have assigned in your transcription, your adaptation, to just use the same slurs as the piano, right? We got the same slur here, we got the same slur there, right? Pretty much. You extended this one a little bit. Now here we're getting to this very pianistic slur over the mezzo staccato going to the accented note. So I referred to this in a few evaluations, this one and the last one, the I group, and I'll just very quickly touch on that for you in a little bit. And then of course, like slurring across everything, like we've got here. Here you split it up, right? So that was good. So all right, so I want you to think about the original piano phrasing as being a bit of a trap, okay? You need the instruments to speak as regular orchestral instruments that have bowing and breathing and other concerns, right? So this is all playable by flute. The flute player can get from one end to the other in one breath, but it takes away the ability for the flute player to articulate any kind of downbeat or any kind of stress, right? You know what I mean? As opposed to da 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 da. You know, I mean, there's so many different ways to do this rather than just dropping that monolithic slur over it. And the same thing is true here. Da, right? But what you could be doing is da 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 or da 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 da. Right? There's a bunch of different ways of doing this, right? And then here. This is Tenuto Staccato, which is staccatoing with the bow all in the same direction, right? So basically you're asking the player to go staccato, 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 accent all in one bow, right? So it's going to sound like right? And the same thing is true here of like horns. They're going to be going, let's use flute. The flute is going to go Now, if you just make the slur going this far, then they can put a tongued articulation here. Ta, right? So that's what you are taking away when you just drop this slur onto that part. Okay, and then just could it be da 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 or da 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 da? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways of doing this, right? Rather than just using most of the slur. Okay, so I think that is really the important thing to touch on because you've been around these challenges for a long time, right? The only other overall thing that I could say is that I've avoided stressing the importance of mock-ups sounding good in the past, and I'm just finding that even though you shouldn't score to the mock-up, score mock-ups for their own sake, you should really avoid that. But you still have to make sure that your mock-ups have some kind of simulated integrity to them, right? And I would just encourage you, whatever you're using right now as your sounds, maybe try to get something a little bit better. The string sounds here sound like solo sounds rather than ensemble sounds. And there's a little bit of brittleness to the wind sounds and so on. So maybe Note Performer would be a better option than what you're using right now. Is it Garritan or I don't know. Anyways, but try to have something a little bit more authentic sounding. Just in terms of your work with, say if you're working with a choreographer. If you're working with a choreographer, they're not going to be able to hire an orchestra. So basically your mock-up has to sound orchestral. You have to really make it sound as good as possible because they're going to use that recording. And also just, in terms of showing people who aren't involved with music what your music is going to sound like. So just think of improving that, all right? So now let's talk about the orchestration a bit. So this is all going to work pretty nicely. The clarinet and the horns working together with a bit of flute over the top. I would say make the clarinet and the horns soft and make the flute just piano crescendo, right? And you don't need to swell. The accompaniment doesn't need to swell. It can just stay piano throughout and then just gain energy here, right? And then that would make a nice flute solo, right? And really, like, piano wins, piano crescendo wins, and then pianissimo strings coming through, right? The strings should be piano, right? And everything else should be softer, right? If you want a nice blend. Then crescendo to mezzo forte, the horns should stay one notch, one dynamic notch under, right? So if they start pianissimo, they could maybe get to mezzo piano by here, if mezzo forte is the loudest sound. And then you should tell us, like, where are you going with this, right? Mezzo forte diminuendo to what? Right, to piano, to pianissimo, to what? And then, because, like, the glockenspiel note has got to, I mean, basically you're telling us that this is going to go down to piano, right? So tell us what the destination dynamic is, right? And then da 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 da. This is nice. This is just really nice, standard scoring. Now here, just be really careful about this. Like, this is cool, right? The mezzo staccato, right? But mezzo staccato to tenuto mark, that kind of doesn't really mean anything. Better just to have a staccato mark and then a tenuto mark, because a tenuto mark is going to be a nice long bow. Now, I mean, if you were thinking mezzo staccato to portato, that, I mean, that's just kind of weird. All right, I would just avoid it. Just make these two separate notes. Don't just transport this. Don't say, okay, well, just put this in here, because this doesn't really mean anything in terms of or it means less than what you think in terms of strings. It's just fussy if you were to really try to interpret that as a double bassist playing exactly what you're asking there. And probably they would just end up ignoring the slur anyways, right? So you do it too. You do that too. Take away the slur. All right. And I really like this here, da 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 dum, in the oboe, but it should be doubled by something in the strings just to give it more integrity. Okay. Now here we got the bump 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 bum, horns plus flute on top. The problem here is that the flute just cannot. You're asking mezzo forte in the horns, and the flute is just a soft instrument in its first octave, right? So the only way this would ever possibly work is if the horns were piano, right? And it's almost wasting the effect too, because, like, just similar to what I talked about a couple of evaluations ago, what is the flute really contributing to, in its lowest octave? What is it really contributing to the sound of the first violins, which is so powerful? Like, the instrument for you here is clarinet rather than flute, if you want that cooler sound and you want it to contribute something really, meaningful to the first violins. Okay, but other than that, it's really nicely scored. Just bring the volume way down on the horns and possibly change this to clarinet, and then that would work really great. Okay, and then I love this little answer right in here of just all winds. So that's done well. And then bum 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 bum. Now here you did you put in F natural instead of F sharp, right? And I think the chord in general it might be wrong. So just watch out when you're transcribing. I was actually considering next challenge of maybe just like the first few bars I would notate out if it is complex in terms of its harmony, because, and then just making that available as like a music XML file for people to use, just because there were so many errors in, like, the chords here at the end. So anyway, so just watch out. I don't know if I'll do that, but whether I do or not, just really try to be careful about what the harmony is within some of these more complicated passages. So just similar to what I said before in other evaluations, and that is that when you are harmonizing out every single, if you are realizing the harmony in every single note of the brass and the winds, the strongest strategy for the strings is to play octaves rather than to play, to double the harmony in the other instruments. Right here you got your B flat trumpet kind of doubling the da 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 da. I'm singing it. I'm ignoring the F natural. Okay. So just imagine this is G sharp and that's F sharp as I sing. Okay. So you've already got this really strong trumpet on top here, right? And then you've got elements of harmony here in the horns, and then the trombone on the bottom, and tuba, under that, and then the other notes are sort of filled in. This is not necessarily the strongest way that this could be harmonized. I mean, like theoretically, you could have two flutes, two oboes, right? So this could be filled in a little bit stronger. But like the trumpet plus the flute is okay up to this B flat, right? And when you get to that B flat, the flute basically is going to disappear, and then this last note here is not going to be heard at all with the oboe in front of it, and and it'll just get absorbed into all the other things that are going on in here, the first violins and so on. So it doesn't really, I mean, you can just leave it in, it's not going to hurt anything, but it's really not going to contribute very much, right? So but I'm kind of getting away from the overall point, which is that it's better just to have the strings play octaves, and then the sound, like there's more weight on each of those single octave notes. Those notes, let's say that you have the firsts on F sharp at the top of the staff, and then the seconds on F sharp at the bottom of the staff, and plus the violas, and then the cellos an octave below that, right? Then that is a really balanced sound, and it gives the ear the illusion that the strings are playing harmony throughout, right? It's just one of those little tricks. But the ending is fine, right? It's nicely done. Just make sure that the brass, like here you go, mezzo piano. I don't know why you have mezzo forte for the horns. They should also be mezzo piano, right? Mezzo piano in the brass, mezzo forte with the winds and strings, and then going down to, if you go down to piano here, go down to pianissimo with your, see, you did that here. That should have been the same thing for your horns right in here. Okay, so that's all I had to say about this, Sean. Like, thank you once again for entering this challenge, and just keep entering it, all right? I'm just really interested to see how you're developing and how you are meeting these challenges and just getting better every year, and and giving me more to teach you, right? And I just feel that is really exciting, and I invite people to continue doing that. If you felt that what I said was useful and it's making your orchestration better on other projects, then come back next year, please, and give me another score in the next evaluation, because it'd be great to sort of see how, I don't know if I can do 146 scores next year too. I don't know what next year's going to be like, but yeah, this has just been an awesome gift to me. Thank you, everybody. And if you want to thank me back, then just make comments on the other scores. Even if it's just saying, "Hey, I liked your scores, everybody," or I like this score in particular, or that reminded me of some other piece, or whatever. You know what to do, everybody. So thank you, Sean, and now on to the very last score of this group of evaluations. All right, so now for the last evaluation of this group, and it's a really interesting score. There are a lot of really cool, subtle things to it, and there are definitely some things that need some fixing. It just depends on whether or not certain things are errors or experiments or other kinds of things, right? So I have a feeling that it's more in terms, we're looking at things that are more like experiments, right? So for instance, like maintaining, like rather than going down to the root and then back to the 5, you're just basically doing a pedal root all the way through here, and you're leaving out ba ba da da, the little counter melody inside the melody. So some of the resolutions are being left out. Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning, okay? And I'll just work through this. Now, some things I think you are going to want to check against the original score, some things that got left out. And I don't want to go over them too much, but they really did have they played a significant role in the music. So, you just might want to go back and check, all right? But more I won't say. So, starting off from right here, we have extremely soft scoring with that English horn right in the middle. And this is almost where I would have felt that it would have been better to have 2 clarinets, like this second flute part be covered by by the clarinet as well, right? So if we had 2 clarinets here, you're not really telling us how many of each are on a part, right? So is this 2 flutes, 1 flute, 1 oboe? I'm only seeing 1 oboe here. So you really have to tell us how many of each are playing here at the beginning. So yeah, and then you have 2 trumpet parts, but it's actually 4 trumpets altogether, right? So you just really have a massive heavy brass section right in here just to play 2 bars worth of stuff. Okay? So, but just tell us how many and of each, right? 2 trombones, right? Okay, but going back to here, I really feel that this would work better as clarinet pitches, right? Just because the lower you go with flute, the softer it is, and the harder it is to really hear the other elements against it, right? The more difficult it would be for this English horn part to play over it without just kind of obscuring the background. Okay, now you bring in bassoon, and that's all good. Now here you're kind of climbing up into the upper register of the oboe as you double, and then you kind of come out of it and you drop down to a better register for your English horn. But yeah, it just depends on whether or not you want to play the octave there, or I mean more or less works, but it's then you bring in your flute and so on. So the main thing here is that you want your violin line right here to be supporting and be supported by the other by some line or other by the flute. Okay, but there is kind of an issue here in that the notes right here are not enough on their own. They really should be doubled at pitch, right? So these oboe notes could have been an octave higher coming in here, this A, right? This part right in here could easily have been an octave higher to overlap right in here and then come back down. That leaves you with cor anglais and oboe in octaves, and that works fine, especially with this cushion in the background of bassoons and clarinets and a little bit of horn. And right here, you don't tell us what dynamic you're starting at, and that's extremely important, right? Right here, you probably should start pianissimo, and instead of going to mezzo forte, you should crescendo to mezzo piano, because the horns are so much more powerful than the winds. They're just incredibly more powerful than the winds. So, and I would also try to avoid just scoring your melodic parts 1 degree louder than the other elements, right? It's better to have dynamic scoring that is homogeneous. In other words, more or less, the dynamics are the same across the part, and it's the strengths and weaknesses of the instrument that balance things rather than giving every part a different dynamic. Okay, so this is all fine in here. I like the little celesta and harp scoring. That's all very graceful and elegant. And there really isn't anything in here that doesn't quite work. You just dynamically need to watch out. All right, so now we're getting to da 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 dum. So this is nice. Now here you leave out the resolution da 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 dum. Right, you do throw in. You do have like this F sharp, and you throw you even throw like a even higher note on top of that. Okay, but what's more kind of unusual here, as I mentioned at the beginning, is this kind of pedal B fifth, right? So that keeps what's going on in the piano part is it goes bum 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 bum, and then jumps up again to like a chord that is kind of based on, it's more based on the dominant, right? Even though in the piano score she's telling you to just continue to hold, and you want to emulate that here. The fact that it isn't really, taking over, there isn't a drone in the bass, means that the focus goes back up here to these other chords, right? So by kind of forcing the ear to really hang on the tonic throughout here, you really create a completely different sense there. So it's just like, my comment here is either, if that was intentional, then really interesting, that's a really interesting variation on the original material. But it is no way to necessarily interpret this true to the intention of the composer, right? Because it just overemphasizes the tonic here. Okay. So ba da da dum bum ba da da dum ba da dum. You go all the way up to there, but I'm not really hearing the melody da da dun dun dun, which is resolves the chord. Okay, so that kind of got left out. So I mean, if that was intentional, once again, that's cool. If it wasn't, watch out. All right, and then you have trills. This is kind of a rare thing. I think there were trills in a couple of others, but not as much here. Now, the piccolo is really not going to contribute very much here at all. Like the piccolo's first octave is very similar to the flute's first octave, so it's unusually weak. It would be better to have the top line be A2, A2, so 2 on a part, rather than having piccolo right in there. I just like, the piccolo in its first octave is kind of flute-like and kind of weak. And it isn't necessarily the best match for the flute in terms of just kind of blending and working together in a strong way. And then, of course, accents in piano and mezzo piano. You could have both parts marked piano. I would split this between first and second violin, so you get more players on a line, and then you don't have to do dynamic mixing like this. Okay, and then here we have accented piano, bassoons and horns, and then a little bit of celesta. Now, this is going to get swallowed up by the sound of the horns, even marked softly like this. So it would be better if it were an octave higher. Then it'll probably balance out better. And then don't put ottava over a cello part like this. What you would want to do here is something like this. So, oops. So you would want to basically, first let's save the bass staff. Just put it right here. And then tenor clef. Sorry. Tenor clef right here. And then, okay, there you go. See, that's how to do it. All right. So mark your high parts tenor clef at the right pitch, okay? And then you're fine. Now, this would sound just as good if the upper voice was actually played by violas instead of divisi cellos, excuse me. Okay, so now you have your your muted horns, muted heavy brass playing into your stands. That's kind of a fun effect. And then taking over at the end, kind of overlapping to this, horns plus these other parts. So I would really recommend that, unless you really want the horns to blaze out. I mean, that's kind of an interesting sound, an interesting effect that you got using the mock-up. But if you want this to overlap, what you should do is, we have mezzo forte, diminuendo to piano, right? I would come in at piano here, and then go crescendo to mezzo forte here, and then have everybody be playing the same dynamic rather than this weird hodgepodge of crescendo, diminuendo, or just diminuendo, right? I think that you should try to I'd say these elements should all have the same dynamic arc, right? I think it should all be piano or mezzo piano crescendo, right? And even down here too. I see where you're going with this. You kind of want everything to sort of die away here at the end, but if you have this thing flare out, or this element flare out, then you have to think about the other elements in the music and just like burying them with the horn suddenly standing out. You just really have to know what you're doing here. So, I'm kind of on the edge about this. It kind of works and it kind of doesn't. I think it would be better to have 3 horns here rather than asking your English horn to compete with your standard horns. There's no reason why you couldn't have 3 horns, right? And just make this into another horn part. Probably would just be the best way to go about it if you really want it balanced. And then I would say the other elements could all go diminuendo together, but just the way that it's scored with horns and English horn. And then I think also, just to get a really good overlap, you should come from a soft going into loud and then back again. All right. So yeah, so this gave me a few things to think about. One other thing is, this is not going, this harp writing in here will be completely buried by the sounds of the muted brass. The muted brass will just kill everything that the harp wants to do here. All right, especially in this register of the harp. It's very hard. It's very easy to get buried, and it's such a beautiful register that it really deserves to be solo or some other kind of thing in another kind of part. Okay, so otherwise this kind of cool. It would be interesting to see where you're headed with your orchestration. So you're welcome to join next year. It would be great to have another score from you, so just think about some of those things. And really, I would just really recommend, especially like my developing orchestrators, really watch a lot of the other evaluations, like the website evaluations, just kind of covering this same exact range. Like, watch them and just kind of observe what other people did, listen to my advice about their scoring, and I would say, like, maybe watch some of the more experienced orchestrators if you like, but like really you're going to learn the most from listening to me talk about like just kind of a very general overview of experienced and developing orchestrators, right? So just really focus in on it and listen to a lot of the things that I say. Maybe take notes like about some of the things that kind of crop up again and again, and so on. Because I just really think like I'm seeing people who have got just tons and tons of talent, but they just really need to work on their craft quite a bit and need to remember some certain fundamental truths about dynamics, about the strengths of instruments, about their timbre, about the registers, and which registers are stronger than others. And those are things that you want to become instinctive in your little box of craft. Okay, so please think about that, because pretty much everybody who entered this challenge had something really cool to say, and I want you all to be able to express it as competently as possible. All right, so that's all I've got to say for this really great group of scores, and I will be back tomorrow with some evaluations from our Longa dotted brev level in the Patreon entries. Thanks very much, everybody.